Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to everyone joining us from Hawaii, too. Thank you for joining us for today's NRI Committee webinar, Going with the Flow, Sustainable Water Policymaking, where we will discuss how state and federal programs are addressing water resource planning and sustainable management, including conservation and efficiency. My name is Mindy Bridges, and I work in NCSL's Environment, Energy, and Transportation program here in Denver, Colorado, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before I introduce today's speakers, I want to review a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is part of the Natural Resources and Infrastructure Committee's 2017 Spring Webinar Series. As part of the series, the committee will host a new webinar every other week with our final webinar Thursday, June 29th, which will explore the impact of outdoor recreation on state economies, examine various funding approaches for state parks, and highlight state case studies. For a complete schedule, recordings of previous webinars, and registration details, please visit our website at www.ncsl.org. As a reminder, our webinar today is being recorded, and registrants will be able to access a recording of the webinar and presentation slides on NCSL's website. I hope you will all have a lot of great questions for our presenters, so we will hold Q&A until after all three presentations. The Q&A will be held through our chat box, which is located on the lower left-hand side of your screen. So please feel free to type your questions in there at any time during the presentations. NCSL staff will be gathering the questions and will read them out to our presenters towards the end of the webinar. Also, you can access a copy of all the slides by clicking on the play icon, which is on the upper right-hand corner of your screen in between the phone symbol and the hand pointer symbol. So you can download the presentation as well and flip through slides if you need to go back. So back to why we are here today. State water resource planning takes into consideration both current and future demands. Policymakers are increasingly faced with balancing the water supply needs of municipalities, neighboring states, and industry users. Several states have developed state plans in recent years to guide decision-making and define goals and objectives for water management, while other states, such as Hawaii, have passed comprehensive water policy legislation. Promoting conservation and efficient practices can contribute to a more integrated and sustainable water resource planning for states, including alternative water supplies, improved data usage and availability, updated infrastructure, and user behavior all play a role in sustainable water management. Today we'll hear about how state and federal programs have addressed these water policy issues and how you can put them into practice in your state. Today we are so lucky to have with us Maryanne Dickinson, President and CEO of the Alliance for Water Efficiency, State Representative Ryan Imani from the Hawaii House of Representatives, and Kevin Kluge, Director of Conservation and Innovative Water Technologies with the Texas Water Development Board. First up is Maryanne Dickinson, President and CEO of the Alliance for Water Efficiency, a nonprofit promoting the efficient and sustainable use of water in the United States and Canada. The Alliance works with nearly 400 water utilities, water conservation professionals in business and industry, planners, regulators, and consumers. Prior to joining the Alliance, Maryanne was the Executive Director of the California Urban Water Conservation Council. Maryanne has over 40 years of experience in the natural resources field. A graduate of the University of Connecticut with a degree in environmental planning, she is a frequent speaker and has authored several publications on water conservation and land use planning. She currently chairs the Efficient Urban Water Management Specialist Group for the International Water Association. Maryanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to thank NCSL for inviting me to be part of this webinar. It's really a pleasure. And if there are any questions on any of the aspects of my presentation, please feel free to type them in the chat box as I go along, and I'd be very happy to answer them near the end of the webinar. So my part of the webinar is to talk about how water efficiency planning, policy, and programs offer opportunities but also offer barriers. So that's what I'm going to try and cover today. And in terms of where we are in the United States, we know that water shortages are a reality for many water resources planners across the country. A study done by the Government Accounting Office both in 2003 and then again in 2013 showed that 40 of the 50 states are declaring some sort of shortage, from a local shortage all the way up to a statewide water shortage. So given these water resource conditions, it's really important to make sure that our water use is as efficient as possible and that we minimize water wastage, and we try and make sure that efficiency is part of our water resources planning mix. Because as drought cycles in and out of the various states, it can have pretty severe repercussions. Here's a picture of California's Folsom Lake, a major water supply reservoir for the Sacramento area, and this is what it looked like in the height of the California drought in January of 2014. These are, of course, dire situations, but even short-term water shortages can have these kinds of impacts. At the same time that we're experiencing shortages, we're also experiencing growth. Since the conclusion of the recession in 2008-2009, we have seen development on the uprise. We've seen lots of economic boom activity in many of our communities. And the difficulty is where we see this activity is often in those states that are experiencing those same water shortages. This is a map from the EPA website that shows the percentage of growth in each state between the years 2000 and 2015. And you can see the states in what we consider typically water-rich areas like the Great Lakes have very small amounts of growth compared to states like in the West, where we have large numbers of growth. Nevada 43%, Colorado 33%, New Mexico 32%, Texas 31%. You know, states are classically known to experience water shortage issues. So it presents a real challenge in terms of how we deal with that. And so one of those, of course, benefits of conservation is that it helps our water resources planners deal with that. Water efficiency and conservation planning can be a tool to use in times of drought, as it can provide short-term relief from the shortages experienced during drought, because our customers can be brought in to respond with special drought messages and drought restrictions. But conservation is also a planning tool for planning water supplies into the future, because if demand can be kept lower as population is growing, that lessens the gap between what that demand would require and what our available supply actually is. So it enables the accommodation of additional population growth without extraordinary increases in our water supply portfolio. And that has economic benefits. So conservation can be an economic tool as well. If you can defer building new capital facilities for drinking water and wastewater treatment and storage, you are in effect saving your ratepayers millions of dollars. And given the infrastructure bill that we know we're facing in this country, we're probably going to need to spend over $1 trillion for both replacement pipe in the ground as well as new capacity. We are facing some real economic challenges, and if water efficiency can reduce some of those bills, that's an important factor, because we know that our drinking water and wastewater state revolving loan funds are not currently available at anywhere near that level of need. So that's one of the reasons why conservation does help. But you might say, well, yeah, but our district is really only replacing infrastructure. We're not building new infrastructure. And that's only partially true. If you look at this particular chart, this is from the 2013 ASCE infrastructure report. I haven't yet found this analysis in the new report card that they issued this year, but this is still pretty instructive, even though it's from 2013. It shows in the Northeast, which is the top bar, that the dark blue area, which is $155 billion, yes, that's replacement infrastructure, but the light blue is the growth area. So even in the Northeast that has a really strong infrastructure replacement capacity need, there is still some growth. Same in the Midwest. But if you look at the South and at the West, half or even more than half of the infrastructure need that we're looking at in the next 20 to 30 years is going to be new growth, new capacity to deal with all of those growth numbers that we looked at on the map earlier. So yes, water conservation can help reduce some of that new capacity infrastructure need. And this principle is demonstrated in this little graph, which is a stylized graph. It's not really anybody's particular system. It's supposed to just show generally the principles of why water efficiency works. So if you have the solid dark line, that's your baseline demand line that you might be planning for in your community. And then if you do a conservation program, your demand is reduced to where the dotted line is. So if you take a look at the middle of the chart where it says existing capacity, and that might be storage capacity, it might be wastewater treatment capacity, drinking water treatment capacity, whatever that capacity is that might run out in the year 2020, you'll notice now it can extend out to maybe 2028. And then when the community starts to build whatever capacity it now needs, now it can downsize it. It can build it at a smaller scale and not end up with a lot of stranded excess capacity that becomes a stranded asset. And that whole principle, the calculation of the money that's saved in this principle, amounts to millions of dollars of savings for the ratepayer. And there are lots of examples that have occurred over the past several decades of how that has worked. Here's a chart showing Los Angeles as an example of this. The dotted green line is their population growth. So they've added quite a bit more in terms of population. They've added what looks like 1 million more people, but their actual demands in terms of water use have gone down. Their active water demands are more like what they looked like in 1978 than what you might expect for 1 million more people. So this is the principle of water efficiency and conservation, and that's why we urge water systems to do it. It provides a lot of utility system value because it can satisfy the demands of new growth, as we just mentioned, without needed extra capital investment. It can also flatten the demand peak of the summer. If you've got a high demand peak that you have to build to and supply to, even if that peak demand is only needed to be met 13 days of the year, if you can flatten that demand peak, you can save, again, a lot of infrastructure investment. And then recovering the leakage from your distribution system recovers water that then can be delivered to customers as well. These are all benefits of efficient management of water. But it also provides some environmental value. And that's something that we don't often talk about, but it is a definite value when you're drawing your water supply sources from stressed watersheds. So it helps maintain your habitat along rivers and streams that are suffering from excess withdrawals, and helps restore functions and values of wetlands and estuaries, helps protect groundwater supplies from excessive depletion. The less you pump, the more you leave in the aquifer. It also reduces contamination from excessive landscape irrigation runoff. That's an important factor as well. Helps reduce the discharge volume of wastewater. That's a permanent benefit for many systems. And that runoff of urban contaminants, which is regulated now under TMDLs, that reduction has environmental and economic value. So these are all the benefits of conservation. And we started doing a lot of conservation programs in the wake of national standards that were passed. The 1992 Energy Policy Act set standards for plumbing fixtures, and that became effective January 1st of 1994. And then we, over the years, embedded those standards into national building and plumbing codes. 4 states in the U.S. have stricter standards than the federal standards. So California, Georgia, Texas, and Colorado all have stricter standards than the national standard. And we have been working with the Department of Energy over the years for appliance standards for products like clothes washers. We've launched a WaterSense label. I'll talk about that in a minute. And hundreds of water utility programs all across the country tier off of these standards and off of the WaterSense program for retrofitting high water using plumbing fixtures and appliances, and have brought essentially our water demand down nationally because we've been able to take advantage of these standards. The WaterSense label in particular has been a terrific partner. Any product that's WaterSense labeled is automatically 20% more efficient than the federal standard. So it is a high-performance product. It's performance tested, so it's guaranteed to work. There shouldn't be any more complaints about toilets that don't flush well because it's largely been eliminated, and the new products in the marketplace are fabulous performers. And so there's the list of all of the products that have already been labeled by the WaterSense program, including irrigation controllers. Moisture sensors are now in process for a specification. So all of this is an important way to move the market, to transform the market, to get consumers to go ahead and buy the best possible products. And that has resulted in a reduction in our water use nationwide. Although we're still the highest per capita consumption in the world, even much more than our other similar developed country partners, we are improving that picture. This set of bar charts here shows in 1999, a residential end uses study showed that indoor per capita consumption was around 62 gallons per person per day in the average American household. In 2015, it came down to 58. But those households that were retrofitted with WaterSense level appliances and fixtures, they were down at around 36 gallons per person per day of indoor water use. So we know this works. We know that this is a great effort. And we tried to calculate on the 20th anniversary of when the plumbing standards went into effect, we tried to calculate in 2014 what those 20 years had yielded us. And we decided to just look at the toilet standard alone. We assumed a 4% change-out rate, which is a very conservative rate for national change-out. And those savings were occurring without cost to the water utility. They were just happening in the background and were permanent over the life of the toilet fixture. And it amounted to, in our calculations, 18.2 trillion gallons over that 20-year period. And if you're like me, you can't quite get your arms around what that means. What is 18.2 trillion gallons? What that is the 20-year consumption of New York City, Chicago, and Los Angeles combined. I mean, that's a sizable amount of water. So we know these standards and that water efficiency works. Now we're focusing on outdoor water use. That's the big issue right now in water resources management, as we find that 30 to 60% of our urban water consumption on average is going for outdoor irrigation, as much as 80% in some really arid parts of the country. So we know irrigation is a significant user of water, and we know that we're not managing it well. And as automatic irrigation systems become more prevalent because of consumer interest in the convenience of them, it's presenting challenges for management. And water utility managers are now becoming irrigation managers because their summer peak demand is really growing. So this is an area we know we need to spend some attention and pay attention to. So we looked at Australia as a neighbor that had gone through a lot of drought, a 10-year drought, had done a lot of water efficiency improvements. And so the Alliance for Water Efficiency partnered with the Institute for Sustainable Futures in Sydney and the Pacific Institute in Oakland, and we wrote a report, Lessons from the Australian Millennium Drought. And some of those lessons are listed here. You know, integrate conservation into long-term supply planning. Choose the options for conservation that are quickest, cheapest, and easiest, and that will help provide resiliency for the community. Involve your consumers and stakeholders in that process, and make sure you measure your progress. So take a look at the report. It's on our website. At the end of my presentation, I'll give you the URL. But I wanted to finish with the real problem we're looking at, which is a conservation conundrum. Lower demand means reduced sales revenue for our water utilities, and sometimes it means they can't collect their fixed costs. And if they have unstable revenue collection, then they've got a problem. It's both a financial problem and it's a political problem. And sometimes it's just really easy to blame conservation inefficiency for that revenue instability on the part of the utility. This is a typical headline we see, conservation driving up water rates. Even in communities like Louisville that don't have active conservation programs, this is the message that comes out, when a water rate increase is put before the public. And it's not just the public that's concerned. Sometimes the bond rating agencies downgrade our water utility systems and lower their bond rating because they don't see that they're collecting enough revenue to cover their costs. And again, water conservation can be blamed. which we want to maintain is not the sole reason why water rates are going up. Yes, they're going up. Here's the chart that shows the blue line of water and sewer greatly outpacing all of the other utility price increases. We know this is happening. We know it's happening for a number of reasons. So we created some tools to help communities deal with this revenue instability issue. It's a website, and you can see the URL down there at the bottom. We call our program Financing Sustainable Water. We have a rate handbook. We have a rate model that can help water utilities design their rates to be revenue stable but also encourage efficiency. And we have a website that has a lot of resources on it that utilities can go to and use. All of this is available free of charge. And it contains one particular case study that I thought might be of interest. The city of Westminster had the typical problem everybody's got, citizens complaining that they've been conserving for years, but rates are just going up anyway. Why should they bother to conserve if rates are just going to increase? So Westminster did a study and looked at that whole principle of the chart that I showed earlier, avoiding having to build capital facilities because they've kept their demand lower. And what if they had built those? What if they hadn't done conservation? They hadn't brought that demand down? What would the rates look like now? And so what they figured out that the tap fees would have been 80% higher and rates would have been almost double compared to what they are now because they've done conservation. So this is a good news story. Again, that's available on that same Financing Sustainable Water website. We encourage you all to take a look. I don't know many communities that aren't sort of fussing with the whole revenue stability issue as demand is going down. So this is one that a lesson that we would like to pass on to you. So here's a screenshot of the website, financingsustainablewater.org. We welcome you to come and take a look. And take a look at other information that we've got online. We have maintained a conservation information clearinghouse, and we update our information on a regular basis. The shorthand for the URL is a4we.org, and all that information is available free of charge. There's another screenshot of our homepage, so please visit it. We also have a consumer website called Home Water Works, home-water-works.org. And it's got a consumer calculator that helps consumers figure out what their home water use is. It's a fun, easy-to-use calculator. So we encourage you to go visit those resources. We have developed them for you and encourage everybody to come and visit. So thank you. And I'd be happy to answer questions at the end of the session.
Thank you, Maryanne. Yes, as a reminder to all participants, questions will be answered at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to type them in the chat box on the left of your screen if you have any. Next up, we have Representative Ryan Imani, who will speak to Hawaii's comprehensive water policy legislation passed in 2016 and what the legislature is currently up to. Representative Imani currently serves as the chair of the Water and Land Committee. He has dedicated himself to public service as a social worker, instructor, and disaster volunteer for the state of Hawaii. He represents the 37th State House District and has served in the Hawaii House of Representatives since 2005. Representative Imani, the floor is now yours.
Okay, thank you. Aloha to everybody. Aloha from the state that's surrounded by water, but none we are able to drink. So before I begin to talk about our package that we did in 2016 and ongoing into this past legislative session, I wanted to highlight the fact that any legislature, municipality who are making water policy changes, have to address their own political environment. And for any of these bills for Hawaii to have moved forward, it needed a working partnership with the Senate. So, I really would like to do a shout out and an appreciation that it took both chambers of the Hawaii State Legislature to move any measure, as well as it took our Finance Committee and our Ways and Means Committee, our Money Committees, to really get on board and support the initiatives that we felt were important to deal with water policy. How we moved forward in the state of Hawaii in 2016 was before the legislative session began, I brought a lot of these water questions and policy issues to the various stakeholders. So conducted meetings both with entities that represented realtors, to the Chamber of Commerce, to landowners, to farmers, to hunters, all trying to get their perception of what freshwater conservation and protection meant to them. And then with all the feedback, decided to develop a set of bills in which we could get buy-in and support from the various stakeholders, not only for bills that affected them, but also bills that address the whole freshwater access and viability, both as a fiscal issue, a funding and sustainability issue, but also as a conservation and as a policy moving forward. So, this, even though I will be going through a number of the bills, I want to highlight the fact that we had a wide variety of support, both from businesses and industry, that previously really didn't chime in or participate because they felt those water issues dealt with other sectors. And so moving forward, there's 3 bills that I would like to highlight that are not didn't make it to my slides. That I would like to explain. Is the first one was reclaimed water use. So in 2016, the state wanted to make a stand about supporting water reclamation. And so we passed a bill introduced by one of my colleagues that state and county buildings would be required to collect and use water, stormwater, for other than drinking purposes. What we wanted to do was make sure that we as a state set the standard of what should be done in the business sector. The next thing that we did is we wanted to also work with our regulators and make it a point that water, both discharge, wastewater, freshwater access, all belonging to the same, what we call Ahupua'a system, which is water coming from the rain in the valleys, going through the valley and into our oceans. And so what we did that in 2016 is, I think, and we're one of the first states in the country, was to pass a ban on the discharge of treated and raw wastewater sewage into state waters. And this ban would be in effect within 10 years. And the caveat for them would be is municipalities or state sewage systems, if they incorporated wastewater or reusable energy system into that system, they would be able to be relieved from the 10-year implementation. And another thing that we also did was when we worked with the private and public sector, they didn't really have a good measuring mechanism of how much water was being pumped out from our aquifers, how much water was lost through evaporation and leakage. And so what we did is we worked with the Senate and we passed a Senate Bill 2645, which required water audits to be completed. That way, as a state and as the counties could get a better handle of how much water is being used on a daily basis, how much wells do we have that are active, as well as start to measure how many uncapped and open wells that we have that we need to address and close. So moving forward, what we did is we got the buy-in from a lot of different public and private sectors to work together. And so what we found was one of the biggest complaints, both from private landowners as well as public utilities, was the issue of the high cost of water infrastructure. That it wasn't, there was no cost incentives to upgrade your system until either it was fully dilapidated or, they looked at other means of water access. And so what we wanted to do with the support of the legislature was look at innovative ways of addressing this issue. And so one of the things we began to do was explore the cooperation of public-private partnerships into the system. And one of the things in order to make it attractive was to set a standard that others could follow. And so what we began to do was we established a water infrastructure loan program. This year we implemented an RFP, request for proposal process, and by the end of this month, checks will be issued out in partnership for the Water Infrastructure Loan Program. So 1-year pilot, and we will see how much projects are able to be implemented and started to deal with water access for farmers, for drinking, and as well as for conservation and water reclamation. The next, what we then did is we wanted to find out how we could get our regulators in our state more active into the discussion of overall water usage, especially fresh water. So we worked with our Board of Water Supply on trying to address some of their concerns on how they are planning not only for water shortages, any projected climate changes, but also in how to respond to potential natural disasters. So one of the things was that we wanted to include the Commission of Water Resources Management in the discussions of overall health. And so we brought what we call C1, Commission of Water, Department of Health, and the Department of Land and Natural Resources together to develop partnerships on how to work together on developing long-term policy strategies. One of the other things that we wanted to make a stand on in the state of Hawaii was to address the use and support of advanced technology in water. And so we have an island called Kaho'olawe, which is rich with Hawaiian history. It was actually used by the military for target practice, and it was decimated. Their water shelf lens was cracked, and so they only have access to brackish water at best. And because of the lack of water, and at one time feral goats, the island is void of vegetation. And basically when it rains, all the topsoil runs off into the ocean. And so what I've been working on with the Kaho'olawe Island Reserve Commission and other stakeholders is to try to make that heal the island. And so what we're trying to do is make that an example of how we can use desalination to not only bring water for drinking, but also to be able to bring enough water so that you can have sustainable reforestation of native Hawaiian plants and support the host culture on the island. And that's been getting continued traction even this year. The other issues that we also worked on was supporting conservation districts and to get better education out there regarding how the value of watershed protection not only addresses issues of forest and plant and the fight of invasive species as a conservation issue, but also how it's needed for the water to circulate through our soil and enter the homes for drinking. Some of the other issues we addressed as a legislature was we were the hosts of the Conservation Congress last year, and since we were going to have an international stage, we wanted to make sure that we as a state help educate not only the United States and other nations about water conservation, the value of policy, and the value of investment in making sure our infrastructure is sustainable. The other issues that we worked on was, again, water security. We've dealt with issues with the state regarding the use of hydroelectric power plants, as well as our islands are composed of many retention basins and dams that were used previously for agriculture. Hawaii was a huge agricultural state, growing pineapple and sugarcane, and so we had a lot of fallow, unused water retention basins that were decommissioned or not in use because of the concern about liability and safety downstream. And so one of the things that reported to us was the fact that farmers needed water in order to grow high-yield crops or even crops for food production. And one of the things is that if you use water dams and reservoirs, it made the water more affordable for use for vegetation growth. And so what we worked hand in hand with the state department to try to address and make it more viable for private landowners to upkeep and maintain their reservoirs for agriculture production. The other thing that, other issues that we worked on was to address how water was going to be used and monitored and metered through our local streams. And that, again, that was a very controversial issue because water is the lifeblood of the land, and it became a very emotional issue for many stakeholders. People didn't want water to be diverted. There was other people that stated water diversion from streams was vital for the health of other areas. And so what we worked on to try to address this was to begin the process of using new technology to monitor water flows in streams, to determine what is the baseline levels of water use, and how the impact of too much water within a stream or reservoir flow would cause downstream from that area, right? And so we wanted to monitor and keep a track of how much sediment was flowing out into the ocean and how that was affecting marine life, how contaminants within our soil, heavy lead and other things that might be present from old plantation days would make its way down to other areas that were being used for active farms. And so those are some of the other key issues that we continue to keep on the top of our mind when we started looking at issues of water audits. Okay. And the last several bills was, one of the things we began to realize is that as a state, we could not do this alone. The state wasn't designed to be using innovation, low-cost technology to be implemented in water conservation or water use. And so what we started to begin to look at is how do we incorporate the strengths and values from the private sector into the public sector without giving up the security, the monitoring, the transparency, and the focus that this was for the people and not for profit. And so what we began to look at was how to develop a public-private partnership model that would be able to incorporate innovation with issues like water and infrastructure. And to the credit of NCSL, because I was previously the transportation chair and I was part of the transportation P3 discussion, I started using the toolkit and the ideas that were developed through other states on how they develop working relationships to deal with bridges and roads and critical infrastructure, and how to implement that in the state of Hawaii. And so it was decided that in 2017, this year, we just passed, or hopefully it's in front of the governor now, to pass the establishment of a position in which our Department of Business and Economic Development and Tourism will now begin to help identify public-private partnership opportunities outside just transportation, but to include things like recreational stadiums, water infrastructure, even issues that potentially that we've already supported, like water cooling for buildings and hotels, would potentially qualify for additional public-private partnership coalitions and authority. The other issue too is, what we wanted to do is continue the discussion of the value and need for focus as a policymakers on the need and value of good water policy, sustainability. One of the things that we've been incorporating this year is actually having plans developed for freshwater access or drinking water access following a disaster. That's going to be incorporated in the next disaster plan that hopefully will be out by the end of this year. And what we want to do is raise the level of the discussion that water is not just a commodity, that water was vital not only to the health of our citizens, but also the health of our economy. And so in 2016, we moved 14 bills into law that address fresh water and water access. This year, we continued that movement by moving 3 bills that had continued the discussion about water use. And, we wanted to make a statement, to all sectors in Hawaii that the state of Hawaii was going to be a model And so, again, for the state of Hawaii, the understanding is Maui Airport will be one of the first state infrastructures that has committed to using water reclamation as part of their system. We have other buildings that are being in discussion now to use that same type of concepts. So our Department of Transportation took the lead and volunteered to set that forward. And water is now part of the discussion when we talk about food sustainability, food security, and post-disaster response. We actually now have water as part of the discussion regarding land use policy. We now hear about the issue being actively discussed when we talk about conversion of agricultural land into residential home discussions, because in the past, people felt that if they were large landowners, they could easily just drill a well and then pump enough water to address their development. But now with the new discussions, we're looking at how that access to water will impact the whole community and the whole county, which is typically island-wide. So, the last point I wanted to make to everyone is the fact that policies like this require a champion, but the champion is not a single person. It's actually a group of people, hopefully it would be in both chambers, that also seek out the advice and partnerships of the municipality, the mayor's office, the governor's office, to work together to come up with a joint stakeholder issue policy, and then from there develop bills that would address that ultimate goal. And in Hawaii, previously to this, water was always discussed, but there was very minimal action. And over the last 2 years, I'm very proud to be part of the legislature who has taken water as a very serious issue. And, we used examples from what was happening in regards to places like California and Texas, where they went from extreme drought to flooding. And we wanted to make sure that as a state of Hawaii, that, we had the policy framework in place to not only deal with putting regulations in, but also providing the financial opportunities so that landowners who were willing to step up had ability to access funds to be able to partnership with the state to address the needs of water, not only just for their purposes, but the purposes that would benefit everybody. So I will be available for questions, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Representative Imani. So now from Hawaii to Texas. Last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Kevin Kluge. Kevin was recently named the Director of Conservation and Innovative Water Technologies at the Texas Water Development Board. Previous to this, he managed the TWDB's Water Use and Projection section, whose duties include the annual estimation of Texas water use and the development of population and water demand projections. Kevin has worked with water use and projections at the TWDB since 1999, including 3 years as a project manager for 3 of the state's 16 regional water planning groups. Within his own community, he has served on various professional, neighborhood, and city planning-related committees and boards. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Over the next 50 years, the number of people in Texas is projected to double. And while much of Texas is blessed with adequate water resources today, to meet the needs of those future Texans, we need to utilize conservation and innovative strategies to reduce how much each of us will use from our freshwater resources. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'll give some background information regarding water planning in Texas, and then describe how a number of innovative strategies, including conservation, are coming about through information, planning, and implementation. Quick disclaimer, I love talking about water planning, so any wild statements that I make should not be attributed to the positions of my board. Why do we plan? Texas weather is a pattern of frequent droughts and occasional floods. This graph shows the share of Texas that was in various stages of drought conditions ending in 2011. The darker the red, the worse the drought conditions, and the higher the peaks, the greater the percentage of the state that was in drought. 2011 was the worst single-year drought on record in Texas, and it was a strong reminder of why we plan for water. Many water systems were struggling with meeting demands, and some were facing running out of water during that year and the subsequent years. Indeed, 2010 to 2014 was the second most severe statewide drought after the 1950s drought. It was the 1950s drought that really compelled the state to undertake water supply planning. And it's still considered the statewide drought of record to this day. Between 1961 and 1997, the state developed 6 water plans, generally developed by state agencies here in Austin, with limited stakeholder input from across the state. In the late 1990s, the state experienced another drought, and the Texas legislature decided that water planning needed to be turned on its head. Regional water plans would be developed in a bottoms-up process that was then rolled into the state water plan. Since then, 4 iterations of regional and state water plans have been developed, with the most recent being the 2017 state water plan. A quick snapshot of the regional water planning process. There are 16 regional water planning areas across the state of Texas. Each area has a water planning group with 12 interests represented on the planning group, and each group adopts a new regional water plan every 5 years, which then is rolled up into a state water plan. In a nutshell, what the regional water planning groups do in their plans is answer 5 questions. How much are we going to use in the future? How much do we have now? Do we have enough? If we don't, what do we need to do to get more? And how much will that water or those projects cost? As I mentioned, the population of Texas is projected to grow significantly over the next 50 years, and through 2070 it's supposed to top out, projected at 51 million people, which is about double what it was in 2010, just over double. So there's going to be a lot of growth throughout the state. And that's going to translate to a higher demand for water. The next step in these regional water plans is to develop water demand projections or future water use by the 6 water use categories. Cities and water utilities are not the only water users in the state. You'll note that the largest category of water use in the state is irrigation, projected to use over half the water in the state in 2020, and it's the green line at the top there, and then it declines over the planning period. The second largest category is municipal water use, which has the largest rate of increase over the 50-year planning period and is expected to actually overtake irrigation by the year 2070. Manufacturing and steam electric power water demands are also projected to increase. After determining these future water demands, the planning groups compare these projected demands with the existing supply of water. If the demands exceed supply, the results are projected needs. So the term needs in Texas Water Plan refers to that difference, the deficit between how much water you have and how much water you're going to need. Of course, irrigated agriculture had the highest demands, and it also has the highest needs going out through 2070. The future needs of municipal water users skyrocket nearly 6-fold, from about 500,000 acre-feet of water in 2020 to 3.4 million acre-feet of water in 2070. Other water demand categories also have needs, but not nearly to the extent that municipal increases or the irrigated agriculture's needs. Now, after identifying the needs, the planning groups recommend strategies, how they're going to meet those future demands. Now, this figure shows the relative shares of the 8.5 million acre-feet of water management strategies in 2070 by type of water management strategy. In this pie chart, pink it illustrates demand management strategies, and blue represents water supply strategies. The largest piece of the pie you see in the upper left there is other surface water. Essentially, these types of strategies, are utilizing the surface water that already exists. reservoirs that need pipelines to connect the reservoir to the cities. There's also irrigation agriculture, the second largest piece of the pie, followed by new major reservoirs, and then municipal conservation. And as we make our way around that circle towards the left, you see that more innovative strategies are included, such as reuse, indirect or direct, drought management strategies, or other conservation strategies, or desalination, whether it's groundwater or surface water. So, as you see, Texas is intending to utilize many of the conventional water supply choices, such as rivers, reservoirs, and new wells. But the water providers are also intending to pursue many of the new strategies that reduce how much water we will need to take out of the natural environment. So particularly for the cities and water utilities in the state, new and innovative strategies can meet future water demands while reducing how much is taken out of the environment. As was shown earlier, municipal water demands are projected to grow from 5 million acre-feet to 8.4 million acre-feet. And that's what's shown in this graph in that red line you see there. That was shown before, that increase from 5 to 8.4 million acre-feet. However, those demand projections in the state water plan include water use savings due to the replacement of fixtures and appliances with more water efficient fixtures and appliances. Without these efficiency savings, these assumed efficiency savings that are going to take place in the future, the projected water use would be much higher, that blue line at the top, up to 9.3 million acre-feet of water that we'll need in 2070. If all of the recommended strategies for conservation, drought management, direct reuse, and desalination are implemented in 2070, the projected statewide municipal water use would decline from that 9.3 million acre-feet in 2070 to 7 million acre-feet also in 2070, a decrease of about 25%. So the bottom line is the implementation of conservation and innovative strategies can reduce how much we will need to take from freshwater resources. Similarly, if all those same strategies were implemented in 2070, the projected statewide municipal average gallons per capita per day, GPCD, in 2070 would decline from 163 under the non-replacement efficiency scenario, or 147 currently projected in the state water plan, to approximately 122 gallons per capita per day. So implementing these strategies will be making each Texan more efficient, or as the title notes, bending the arc of future water use towards a sustainable future. And that's important when the number of Texans is expected to double. A big part of ensuring that such strategies are implemented is funding. In 2013, the Texas legislature created a new funding source, which is entitled SWIFT funding, specifically to fund strategies in the state and regional water plan. I won't go into it too much more in order to move through a few more slides, but it has been a great resource in implementing these plans. In just last few minutes, I want to talk about some of these strategies, including conservation and the information that we're gathering and disseminating about them, how they're included in the regional and state water plans, and then the implementation that's taking place currently. Conservation strategies, we annually collect information about conservation through annual water loss audits and conservation plan annual reports. Conservation strategies, as you saw in that pie chart, are significant pieces of how we're going to obtain the water for the future. Irrigation conservation was the second largest piece of the pie, and municipal conservation included over 1,000 cities and utilities that were anticipating pursuing conservation strategies, saving over 200,000 acre-feet of water in 2070. In terms of implementation, the Water Development Board has annual agricultural conservation grants of approximately $600,000 a year to state agencies and political subdivisions to further agricultural conservation. And in the last 2 fiscal years, we've had 5 projects for conservation that have received funding from that SWIFT program for $104 million. Reuse, we collect reuse information annually through an annual water use survey, and the state has produced a number of feasibility studies to provide information on reuse, and has also developed a direct potable reuse resource document. Reuse is very evident in the regional and state water plans, with 40 direct potable reuse strategies and about 360 other types of reuse strategies in the plans. Implementation, there's, as in many parts of the country, we have quite a bit of reuse going on, about 160 water systems utilizing reuse, and we have a number of communities utilizing direct potable reuse. The Big Spring area out in West Texas, as well as Wichita Falls, utilizing direct potable reuse for a couple of years during the depths of the drought. And El Paso is moving towards direct potable reuse project that's supposed to be operational in 2019 or 2020. Desalination, quite a bit of that's going on now. Over the last 10, 15 years, the state has had a dozen or so feasibility studies and research projects, and we've also engaged in what's called the BRACS program, which Brackish Resources Aquifer Characterization System, in which our agency is identifying the brackish groundwater in the aquifers of the state so that it might be used in the future. In the regional and state water plans, there are about 56 strategies for brackish groundwater and about 10 for seawater desalination strategies. And implementation at this point, there are about 36 municipal desalination plants in the state. That includes both some that treat surface water, but most of them treat groundwater. We don't have any seawater desalination plants yet, but there is soon to be completed an industrial desalination plant down in the Corpus Christi area. So as a wrap-up, water for Texans will come from a large variety of sources, rivers, reservoirs, and aquifers, but increasingly will come from non-potable sources, and just as important, the amount that we will use will be stretched through conservation and reuse. So with that, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here with you today, and like the other guests, I'm happy to answer any questions that we might have.
Thank you, Kevin. So to all attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box. I haven't seen any yet, so and we're almost to the top of the hour, but do any of the 3 speakers have questions for each other, or any quick kind of follow-up points?
No, I was just hoping we might have some questions from the audience.
Yeah, someone, Kelly Ripple just asked if we'll have links to copies of the presentations, and yes, you can access the slide deck on the upper right-hand bar. It kind of looks like a play symbol in between the phone and the finger pointer. We have one question coming in from David Rader. Have all possible dam possibilities been exhausted? I think he probably means, are there new dam construction or other possibilities you see in the country? So that may be a question for Maryanne or for Kevin.
Well, I can jump in and start. Certainly the issue of storage in California has been pretty controversial over the years. Largely, new storage dams are opposed by the environmental community because they impede the flow of rivers and reduce water that would be flowing for habitat purposes. And in the past, it's always been alleged that there's not enough additional rainfall to fill yet another reservoir. But this past year, the deluge that came from all the rains this past year resulted in a significant amount, many hundreds of thousands of acre feet that actually went out to sea and didn't get captured. So the storage discussions, I'm sure, are going to be renewed, and it has to be a balancing act between what you're damming. Off-site, off-stream reservoirs are probably going to be more palatable than on-stream ones if they're approved.
Yeah, and I'd say in Texas, the regional and state water plans include 26 new major reservoirs. So there's certainly areas in the state where reservoirs are being considered. Some of those are off-channel reservoirs, I don't know, probably half and half or so. But that's certainly one of the strategies in the toolbox that's still being considered.
Thank you, Maryanne. Thank you, Kevin. We have another question that just came in about desalination, saying it's been criticized in the past, and so what specific situations is it viable? And I think Representative Imani mentioned one, and Kevin talked about it as well. So I guess, Kevin, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, seawater desalination has always had the burden of the high cost. So that's, I think, still holding that back. But over the last 5 years, groundwater desalination has really received a lot of interest in the state, desalinating the brackish groundwater that's plentiful in the state. And I think that the cost of doing that has come down enough so that it is a viable project for some areas or some cities and some water utilities that need that water.
Yeah, and I would like to add on what Kevin was saying is that is accurate. There's countries like in Africa and across the world that is using desal systems to take out particulates for small use wells, as well as for smaller cities and areas for its use. As well as there's different levels of the permeation that could be used not only just for drinking, but also be used for active food production. Desal has an issue not only with the high cost of energy, but also the discharge of the high saline, warmer water. And so that's always been an issue about the impacts of the higher salt content, both to wildlife and others. And so my understanding is with the new technology, some of that energy cost could be reduced with the use of things like solar. And the technology is portable enough that you can actually now incorporate it into areas and communities that having a full water pumping station is not viable or not economic, as well as the impacts onto things like swamp areas or conservation areas that were typically inaccessible. And so these small systems can be portable enough and viable enough that it could reduce the need for things like fossil fuels. So with the advancement of technology, these kind of systems are potentially at least part of the mix for the discussion.
And if I could just add a final comment, we do see applications for large-scale desalination plants because the economies of scale come from some of the larger applications. But then we see that those same projects become stranded assets in times of when the drought ends. Australia is a great example of where investments were made in desalination, and in Melbourne and Sydney, and those plants are not operational at the moment. They've been mothballed because of the high cost of operating them. So the economics have to be very, very carefully examined for desalination.
Thank you, everyone. I haven't seen other questions pop up, and since we're a little bit past the hour, I think we'll need to wrap up. If anyone has further questions, feel free to email NCSL staff or any of the speakers. And I'd like to extend a final thank you to each of our speakers and, of course, to everyone who participated in the webinar today. Just another reminder, the recording of today's webinar and the presentation slides will be made available. Please also join us at NCSL's Legislative Summit from August 6th to the 9th in Boston. We will be having a special issue forum on interstate water planning and conflicts with speaker Dr. Peter Glick from the Pacific Institute. And another reminder, our next and final webinar in the series will be held on Thursday, June 29th. The webinar is Active Assets, State Parks and Outdoor Recreation, and you can register for that webinar at ncsl.org at the same page you registered for today's webinar. So thank you everyone for your continued interest and support of NCSL, and have a great rest of your day.